Today on the podcast, a mantelpiece moment that reflects on how I judge books, a novel that tells the tales of shipwreck, mutiny, and murder, and of course the weekly reveal to what magical book I have pulled down from my to-be-read shelf. All of that and more this week on A Novel Review. Hello and welcome to the literature podcast, A Novel Review. My name is Seamus, your host, and together we will discuss, dissect, and explore the wonderful world of literature. And the wonderful world of literature is a vast and dense jungle. So let's start making our way through, one book at a time. Hey guys, welcome back. Another day, another episode. Same host. My name is Seamus, I am your host, and for today's episode, The Seafaring Adventure by David Grann, his latest novel, The Wager. But before I sail into this book, I always take a moment to reflect on any mantelpiece moments, something to highlight from the week past. And this past week, a listener reached out and asked a very interesting question, actually. Abigail asked, how do I judge the books? Because at the end of the episodes, I always give a rating of the books, and is there a basis for this? And it kind of caught me unawares because no, there is not really a basis for it. There is yes and no, actually, I should say. There is a loose basis. Off the top of my head, if I ever rate a book a 4 or higher, it means that it is a book that I would reread. That doesn't necessarily mean that I will reread the book itself, but it is a book that I would reread. But then I sort of rate books based on what kind of books they are. So, for instance, I'm about halfway through Sylvia Plath's The Bell Jar at the moment, and off the top of my head, I'd probably rate it about a 3 out of 5. I'll talk a bit more about that later in the episode. But then in comparison to another book I'm reading at the moment, something like Yellowface, at the moment, I'm about halfway through that as well, and I'd probably rate that about a 3.5, maybe a bit higher. And it's kind of like, am I really rating Yellowface, a book from, I think it was 2 years ago now, higher than Sylvia Plath's The Bell Jar? Because, I mean, it's Sylvia Plath, it's The Bell Jar. Well, the answer is, I guess, yes and no, because I'm rating Sylvia Plath's Bell Jar based on the fact that it is a classic, and so I'm kind of almost rating it higher. I'm marking it almost higher because it is a classic, and I think sometimes, books that are classics, that can almost be their downfall in a way. That's not to say that I don't think Yellowface is a great book and might not go on and will not go on to become a classic, of course, itself. That's not trying to take anything away from Yellowface, but it's just Sylvia Plath's The Bell Jar is a classic, and so I sort of rate it that little bit harsher than if I was rating a book that's, fresh on the scene. We obviously don't want to kick every book down that we might not like because we today are picking the classics of tomorrow. So that's sort of, the rough way I sort of pick the books and how I do the rating, basically. I hope that provides some clarity. That didn't provide any clarity to me right now, so probably none to you, but alas, here we are. A bit of housekeeping. If you would like to like and subscribe, please feel free to do so. Please, absolutely feel free to do so. But this is not a cult, so do not feel the need to do it. I'm not forcing you. You don't have to subscribe to me. Just enjoy the show. I hope you just enjoy the show. Ahoy me hearties, let's hoist the gangsail and set off towards the horizon into this book. I didn't actually fact check to see if gangsail is actually a sail on a boat, so hopefully it is. The first work of non-fiction for this podcast, which is rather exciting in itself, but what a book to kick us off. This is just, it was absolutely fantastic. It's a story so rich, so alive. It's incredibly interesting, but also it's really carefully and thoughtfully researched that you shudder at the reality of it all. And it's a book that makes you question humanity's capabilities and just the sheer will to survive. So let's get straight into it. Let's have an overview. Basically, the book is about a ship, the Wager, setting off from motherland of England in the year 1740. It is just one of a fleet of His Majesty's ships setting off on a secret mission during an imperial war with Spain. The Wager, though, however, down in the area off the coast of Patagonia, is shipwrecked. 2 years later, a flimsy ship arrives off the coast of Brazil with 30 men saying that they are the survivors of the wager, and they had a large tale to tell about survival and sheer determination. Their story is believed and lauded as this incredible feat of human determination. However, 6 months after this, another ramshackle vessel landed in Chile. On it, 3 men, barely living, had a different tale to tell. The 30 men were not heroes, but mutineers. And, I mean, that's where I'm going to leave it. That's an overview. I think that sort of sums it up quite nicely and leaves it with a little bit of a cliffhanger. It is just a crazy story. I think what I found most affecting is I've read quite a bit of pirate literature, seafaring literature. I've read Moby Dick. That sort of comes to mind. Treasure Island, I guess, as well. But I remember reading that, and no, Treasure Island does this as well. I remember reading Moby Dick and just wanting to get out into the ocean. I grew up, by the ocean, and after reading Moby Dick, I just sort of had this intense desire to get out there, to get into the ocean, to get out in the ocean. I wanted to swim, I wanted to paddleboard, I wanted to get into really deep water. And I had this really fun, scary fascination with sharks, and I really wanted to just see a wild shark swimming by. I didn't want to sort of go to a spot where I knew sharks were and feed the sharks or anything like that. I just wanted to be in the ocean on my own and just see sort of a shark sluicing by. And I wanted to be exploring. I wanted to be on a whaling ship without actually killing whales, because that part sucks. Maybe it was just my read of those texts of Moby Dick, of Treasure Island, that, maybe I romanticized it, like I said, because I don't remember reading it and thinking that it was really dark and really difficult in regards to survival. It all seemed quite heroic. I'm probably due a reread, to be fair, but nothing like Moby Dick or Pirates of the Caribbean. They sort of really glorify and romanticize these kind of worlds that pirate literature is existing in. I don't think after reading this book, The Wager, that I don't think that I would make it in this world, and I don't think that I would really want to make it either, because this book doesn't really glorify anything in the sense that it just sort of succumbs to this pathetic kind of life these men are forced to live through. The men do, of course, survive, so there are heroics in that, and there are bravery, and I think importantly there is hope. But when they set off to escape the island, for me it didn't really feel that hopeful. It didn't feel solid. It was just kind of like, oh, here we go, this is it. Like, it didn't feel like a solid plan, like something that they had really thought out and worked towards and seized. Like, this is our survival. It more felt like, oh, I don't know if it's better to stay here on this island or to try and move on, and the whole thing sort of seems like a gamble. And I don't know, I just kind of feel like men resort to gambling when they're unsure of their own situation. So that's kind of like a loose background on the story. Let's take a moment now to celebrate David Grann, the author. Firstly, and I said this in a previous episode actually, but he released this in 2023, and he also wrote Killers of the Flower Moon, which was made into a feature film by Martin Scorsese, who apparently, smoke and mirrors, but apparently Martin Scorsese has already acquired the rights to turn this into a film as well. And I mean, that would be absolutely incredible, because it's an incredible tale. So yeah, David Grann, I imagine he's sitting there feeling pretty good about himself right now. And I mean, he absolutely deserves it, because he's done a great job. Now, this book, this story has been researched within an inch of its own life. Non-fiction books with a reference list and a bibliography as long as this one, you just know off the bat that it's going to be incredible and really well researched. And honestly, you would think that this story is only a few years old, not written based on some diary entries and notes from the 1700s. And that's a testament to David Grann. He has put the work in, and it really shows. I think the most remarkable thing for me was this book actually reads like a fiction story. And that's an incredible skill to interweave all these quotes from historical moments. I've actually got a quote that I'm going to read today just so you can get a sense of how much it feels like fiction. And the quote goes, "The men toiled, even as many of them confronted the debilitating effects of malnourishment. Their bodies thin to the bone, their eyes bulging, their straw-like hair falling out. Buckley said this of the castaways: they are in great pain and can scarce see to walk, yet they were compelled onwards by that mysterious narcotic, hope." What a brilliant insight into the world they were suffering through. it's simply incredible to have a piece like this because you have to read every narrative. You have to understand every narrative. You have to understand where every thread is. And then from there, construct the story, pulling these timely quotes, these little threads to ensure that the whole story flows, but never flows without the air of historicity backing it up. Of course, a lot of it is based upon diaries. And so the narrative that David Grann follows is one that's sort of, the most likely and logical. But I guess that's just sort of the case with all history. There can always be that element of doubt surrounding it. So, yeah, as I said, he does a fantastic job narrativizing this story, creating a storyline. I guess the first part, some people might find a bit tedious. It's kind of like setting the scene. As the reader, you're kind of really eager to get into the book because you know what the story is about. The title sort of gives it away. The Wager, a tale of shipwreck, mutiny, and murder. And so you're really kind of desperate to get to that juicy stuff. That's not a criticism from me. I'm generally not too fussed at knowing spoilers of things unless it's like a big plot twist in detective fiction, of course. But this being a non-fiction story and knowing it's drawing upon facts, you kind of know that someone probably survived straight off the bat because otherwise there probably wouldn't be a story backing it up. I tried last year to read the Patrick O'Brian series, the Seafaring Adventure, the first one being Master and Commander. I'm sure many of you know it, the Aubrey and Mauritian series, and I just couldn't get into it, which is apparently pretty common. I went down quite a few rabbit holes, but apparently it's quite common for people to skip the first and even the second book and start with a third. And apparently it's once you've developed that love for the characters and sort of the general storyline that you have the courage to, maybe the patience to go back and read those first two books, which just seems kind of crazy to me. But I guess there are like 20 books in that series. So, missing two is probably like missing the first two chapters of the book. I don't know. But I guess the point of what I was trying to say is I didn't find the opening stages to this book boring at all. I actually find it really fascinating and quite interesting to get a true glimpse into that world of the structured English, sort of the structured English world, and to see it all, really structured, really rigorous and really formal. And I guess that's why the story comes to the end that it actually comes to. As always, spoilers do lie ahead, so tune out now if you don't want to hear this, but from memory, it does actually cover this in the blurb of the book, so it's not a huge spoiler, I guess. But basically, the admiralty and this idea of king and country is so strict in this world, or at least it's presented as this way, that when two separate crews come to light with one side saying that the other are mutineers, it's perceived to be this like really shocking allegation, and the basic idea is that whichever story is proving to be correct, the other side of the story will just be put to death. It actually says in the blurb, it has this line that it wasn't just the wages, captain and crew on trial, but it was the very idea of empire. You can't have a prim and proper empire if your own men are committing mutinies. You can't go around conquering the world claiming that everyone else is primitive and savage if your own men are committing mutiny. It's actually this really fascinating insight into almost the justification the English had for their own narrative, which is kind of the basis for the entire story. Which narrative is correct? Well, I mean, quite simply, we know that history is the tale of the victors. So I guess what happens in this story is when it's just the tale of survivors. I mean, you can already see it's just the makings of a great film, a cross between a courtroom drama and an adventure story, trying to unearth those tales that were explored in these diary entries. I think it's a great place to leave this book. But before I move on, I have to give a rating, of course. And I mean, I absolutely love this. I think it was a great amount of fun to read. I don't know if I want to live through it at all, but it was great to read about. I think I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5. So what am I reading this week? Well, drumroll please, because you already know Sylvia Plath's The Bell Jar. Yeah, I kind of revealed in the Mantelpiece moment that I'm not hating it, but I'm not loving it either. I don't know what I'm thinking actually, because I don't know what I was expecting from a book like this. I think it started really strong. It started really electric. It was hot. It was summer. It was New York, and it felt really interesting. And then from there, it's just kind of slipped a bit to the point that I don't quite know where it's going and what it's trying to do and what it is doing. That being said, maybe I'm just being too harsh because, like I said, it's held up in high esteem as a classic. And I mean, I absolutely love Sylvia Plath's poetry, which again might be an influencing factor. But I'm going to see it through. I'll see it to the end. I'll definitely do an episode on it because it's a classic and it deserves the attention. And yeah, even if I don't like it, that doesn't mean that it's a bad book, of course. We're allowed to have different opinions, but yeah, we'll see when we get to the end if I liked it. So stay tuned for that. Now, before I do close out the show, if you have listened this far, please consider hitting those 5 stars. I would really appreciate it. Although, don't feel obliged. Again, this is not a cult. That being said, feel free to head along to the website and support the pod. But as always, thank you for your attention. So I think it's time to end this episode. And today, to take us away, I think some Lord Byron writing about his grandfather's experiences and struggles trying to do sea burials upon none other than the ship The Wager. And he wrote this line: "Without a grave, unknelled, uncoffined, and unknown."